Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Bob Wood with AFC International. I welcome you back from a good lunch and a great time to spend on the floor with our exhibitors and our networking session we had. We're going to start the afternoon with a fantastic, I think, panel, procurement panel, DHS procurement panel, but we've got a variety of expertise up here to provide insights and some answer your questions. It's a good session. It's got some time to it, so I know that their presentations will be very interesting and informative, but the questions I know is something they're always looking to have at the end. So please be ready to ask your questions. We've got microphones out here in the aisles, so when we get to the point Q&A, feel free to stand up, identify yourself, where you're from, and ask your questions, and we'll all benefit from, I know, the answers. We're going to be guided through this session with a great moderator, Dr. Cedric Sims, who is going to be the moderator for this session from Evermay Consulting Group. Cedric's a proud Texas Aggie. He is indeed. And he's got a number of offspring there as well. He PhD in modeling and simulation and computer science. He is, I think, well qualified with 11 and a half years in federal service, in one case with the Secret Service, and 4.5 years Homeland Security, plus the work he's done with his consulting activity, establishing a whole host of solutions in the past in his government experience, and now working with industry in his consulting activities. He, while he was at DHS, he established the Office of Program Accountability and Risk Management, really taking his expertise and his training, putting it together with review and assessment of programs for their accountability and risk. He is, I think, the right person to get us started. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Cedric Sims and his panel.
General, thank you. And I guess I'd be remiss before I get started if I don't give an opportunity. Do we have the mic? We good? Okay. I'd be a little bit remiss if I didn't make sure that we all remember that there are a lot of folks that are suffering in Texas and Louisiana and Florida from the hurricanes that have been through. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have worked with AFCEA for this conference to seek support from your corporations for additional donations and the like. The education aspect of it is a very unique angle. I think it's a very important one. It's one that AFCEA has done traditionally and does exceptionally well. So I want to thank General Wood, General Shea for your leadership in those cases, and certainly for Dell and others that are contributing to these efforts. So thank you very much. I want to correct the record in terms of the number of offspring at Texas A&M. We have got our first in college. She's a sophomore. We're very proud of her. She's a third-generation Aggie. We've got 3 more behind her, so we'll try to get them there. Yeah, thank you. I want to thank all of you for being here today. I've had a long association with AFCEA. It's a phenomenal organization, and obviously it's just not just made by the membership of AFCEA, but it's also made by all the participants that are here. So thank you very much. Most importantly, I want to get to the point where we introduce this phenomenal panel. Definitely feeling outnumbered. A GSA, DHS SmackDown would be worthy of selling tickets to, right? But I think they know each other too well, so I think you're going to see a lot of camaraderie here. And I can speak to the efficacy of that and how well I've seen all of you work together in the past. First, let me introduce Soraya Correa, the Chief Procurement Officer of the Department of Homeland Security. Ms. Correa was appointed to DHS in January of that role, that is, as the Chief Procurement Officer in January of 2015. Ms. Correa provides leadership, policy oversight, support, and professional workforce development for DHS's her particular organization, over 1,500 procurement individuals, overseeing 9 operational contracting activities, that are the lead contracting activities for the DHS components. And I believe you've also inherited a couple of those functions within your organization already. Amongst numerous awards that she's received over her illustrious career, I want to make sure that you're aware that last night she was also the recipient of the AFCEA Vigilance Award. So again, congratulations, Soraya.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Laura Stanton, Assistant Commissioner, Office of Strategy Management, GSA, Federal Acquisition Service. Ms. Stanton directs the Federal Acquisition Service's strategic business planning, performance management, category management, and acquisition gateway. Ms. Stanton is driving key vision for GSA and has established herself as and her capabilities as the premier government acquisition marketplace. Ms. Stanton has an important relationship with this organization, having served as the Young FCN government on the Young FCN Advisory Council.
Are we making you nervous or something?
No, we're not.
You normally, you don't like, you're stuttering here. It's okay, calm
yeah,
down.
it's
It's okay, we're not going to have a smackdown. That was just a joke.
It's the whole Ike thing that threw me off. So
But the
anyway,
Ike thing, yeah, I told him he was like,
we're going to break out in song and dance pretty soon.
It's okay.
Uh,
It's okay. Calm down.
All right. Next, we'd like to introduce Kay Ely. This is not going to go downhill, I promise. Acting Assistant Commissioner, Office of Information Technology Category, GSA, Federal Acquisition Service. Ms. Ely manages the largest fee-for-service IT procurement and services operation in the United States government. She leads a highly skilled and diverse workforce that manages over 7,000 contracts, provides services, solutions, and to defense and intelligence agencies, as well as to state, local, and tribal governments. Ms. Ely has served at GSA, OPM, IRS, and DOD, all right, and also served at a 5-year stint in the private sector with an organization called ASI Government. So thank you again for joining us. One of the best things I can do here as we enter into this discussion is for me to hand this discussion over and step out of the way. But I'm also going to try to moderate this, cause a little good discourse between my panelists here, and get to some core things that are on your hearts and minds. I do appreciate the input that many of you have provided already to me leading into this panel. So I think we've scoped a lot of our discussion around that. So let's start with Soraya.
Okay.
Okay, what is going on in DHS?
Oh, lots, if you haven't heard. We had a couple of hurricanes. No, just kidding. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I certainly want to thank this distinguished panel. It's a pleasure to be with these two fine ladies. We know each other very well, and we have worked together quite successfully over the last few years. And Kay and I are in competition to see who worked at more agencies, right? Yeah, just kidding.
I'm
Just
gonna
kidding.
win.
And Cedric, I really appreciate your moderating this panel. So what's going on at DHS? Well, a lot of really good things. I think some of you heard from Chip Fulgham, who is our Deputy Undersecretary for Management, who has also served in several capacities, including our former CFO and as well as acting deputy. He talked quite a bit about some of the things that we're doing around unity of effort. And rather than talk to you about just procurement, I want to talk about what we're doing when we talk about unity of effort as a management organization, because I see my role as much more than procurement. I'm one of the business leads of the Department of Homeland Security. As part of that management organization, that CXO suite, whether it's the CIO, the CFO, et cetera, we are part of the business advisors. We are the infrastructure of the agency. We are the folks that enable the mission of DHS. And so what we've focused on, especially over the last 2 to 3 years, is really coming together as a team and integrating our functions together, working as a collaborative team. So when I'm out there working on a procurement, I'm thinking about things like, what's the impact on HR? What's the impact on IT? And bringing my brethren to the table if they haven't already been invited. We're working together as a team to arrive at unified solutions, because that ultimately is the best way to serve the mission. So I think that's one of the most significant changes we have at DHS. The other thing that we're doing is trying to make sure that we're doing a better job of communicating. You will always hear me talk about this. It's not just about communicating with each other within the department, but also communicating externally, whether it's with GAO, IG, the Hill, or with you. Making sure that folks understand where we're trying to go, what's our vision, what are our goals, what are our objectives, and how you can help us, how they can help us, whether it's the Hill, GAO, and IG. We need to approach our jobs a little bit more collaboratively. All of us have our jobs to do and we have our roles to play. But when we come together, we create a more effective and efficient government. And so that's what we're really about. So when I talk about what's changing at DHS, I can tell you a lot of great things are going on in procurement. Several members of my team are out here and they'll tell you they're exhausted and I keep asking them for more. But what I think is most important is how we're coming together to really focus on the business solutions that we provide to meet the mission needs. And evidence of that, I believe, is how we've responded so far to the hurricanes. I'm very proud of the efforts that are going on out there. I happened to be in Austin yesterday meeting with our team that's deployed out there from FEMA. I think we're doing a really good job. Certainly, I'm sure somebody will find something to criticize, and we can always find ways to do it better. But it is very organized, very efficient, and it is all about the security of our homeland. It's all about the people that we affect every day. And so that's our focus, and I think that's what's really changing at DHS.
Thank you, Stora.
Thank you.
Yeah, when you see those water bottles being handed out to survivors of these events, they don't always end up there just through volunteer organizations. A lot of that is your United States federal government, your Department of Homeland Security, who has made those preparations. So yes, Soraya, thank you very much.
It's Homeland Security in partnership with other agencies.
Absolutely.
I can't stress that enough. We do work well with all of our brethren out here.
So Laura, thank you for joining us. And so for those that are less familiar with your specific area within GSA, if you could share with a little bit about that and help us to understand some of the difference between what you would consider the strategic management versus the IT category.
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, I'm just trying to move this up so you can all hear me. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it is a pleasure to be here as well. And especially on a week where we did recognize the events of 9/11 happening 16 years ago on Monday, and then also with the hurricane support that's happening this week. So I know it's a busy week for everyone. My role at GSA is I run the Office of Enterprise Strategy Management, and what that's really designed to do is to think about the Federal Acquisition Service as an enterprise and think about not just what does the IT category need, but also what does our global supplies and services portfolio need in order to support FEMA, in order to be able to support the different customers in emergency management, because we do have a role. We aren't out there handing out the water bottles, but we are providing some of the acquisition support for the common products in the background and services. And so what I'm really looking at is three different areas. And the first is, how does the Federal Acquisition Service focus as an enterprise? How do we give our new commissioner, Alan Thomas, really the information that he has to understand how we're working with the suppliers, how we're working with the customers, and how we work as an effective and efficient organization inside of our own agency. The second piece of my responsibility is the category management PMO. And I'll get more into that as we go, since we have a topic on that later in this conversation. But the bottom line is we support all 10 of the government-wide category managers, including Jackie, who's sitting out here in the audience. Jackie Smythe, who, for those of you who don't know her, is the category manager for the security and protection category. The third piece of my role is, and I'll talk more about this throughout the panel as well, is running and managing the acquisition gateway, which helps with the change management, and it really provides a single portal for all of the government acquisition information. So we can get into all of that a bit more. But I did want to talk a little bit. I mentioned that we have a new commissioner. We have a couple of really exciting things happening at GSA. The first is that a couple of weeks ago we had an administrator nominated, and so we're waiting on Senate confirmation. So we're very excited to sort of see that go forward. The second is that Alan Thomas joined us approximately 60 days ago, a little bit over. He keeps telling us which day it is as he's been settling in. But Alan is, for those of you who haven't had a pleasure of meeting him, he has over 20 years of government experience. He came out of the private sector working for a small business, so clearly, and has spent a number of years working with GSA either as a scheduled contract holder. He also supported the integration of the Federal Technology Service and the Federal Supply Service 10 years ago. So he may be coming in from the outside, but he has a strong working knowledge of how the organization functions. The other piece is he also started his career in government as a President Management Fellow. So he had the opportunity to work with the Department of Defense early on in his career, so he does have a strong sort of standing. And what he's been focused on has also been, at the same time that he was announced, we also had the opportunity to bring the Federal Acquisition Service and the Technology Transformation Service, some of you may be more familiar with it by the term 18F, together into a single organization. And so that's been a lot of his focus, is not only beginning to understand how do we as an organization, the Federal Acquisition Service, work with our customers and suppliers, but also how do we integrate in the Technology Transformation Service. And we had and I will share that we had a 2-day leadership meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we walked out, all of the leaders walked out highly energized. Kay can hopefully attest to that. And, but we walked out really realizing that as an organization, bringing together the traditional acquisition experience as well as the innovation and the thinking that 18F and TTS have brought to it really create a strong synergy. And I know that's an overused word, but really a strong engagement in ways that we can support each other. So everybody walked out really thinking about how do we move forward and how do we really become more than just the sum of our parts as an organization. So that's some of the key things that we've been doing across the organization and that have been keeping us occupied over the summer.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. Appreciate that very much. Kay, would you tell us a little bit more about your area of responsibility?
Well, as you mentioned in the introduction, we have quite a full plate. We have a lot of opportunity, and with all of our industry partners who we work hand in hand with as the delivery arm of the services that we make available, we have a tremendous opportunity. But part of what I wanted to talk about, we talked a little bit, Sarai's talked about what's new at DHS, and Laura talked about what's new at GSA. I think another part of that is what's not new for us. And what's not new for us at GSA is supporting our customer and our customer being at the center of everything we do. At the end of the day, we can spin around in circles and put all kinds of acquisition vehicles in place, but if they don't serve the needs of customers like Soraya, then we're not doing our job. And we have so many incredible stories that we've heard over the last year, couple of years, where we've been able to see the impact and the difference we've made through the vehicles, the acquisition vehicles that we put in place. I heard in a meeting yesterday, we don't even think about things like bug repellent. And I think it was 80,000 pounds of bug repellent that have been delivered to Texas, starting to be concerned about the mosquito population. But that's what warms our heart. And I have to say one thing, I have known Soraya for a long time, but she's one of the customers that you love because she will tell you exactly what she needs. And that's what we want to hear, and that's what we want to know so that we can better serve. I think the other thing that I wanted to share with everyone, just briefly, is the other thing that's kind of new for us or that we're working with right now, and it's good for everybody in the audience to know, is we're all part of the executive branch, and then we get tremendous guidance and support from the executive branch, and we have several opportunities to know where our North Star is and where we need to be headed with so many of the documents that have been coming out from the administration. And it's interesting to me when I have a chance to chat with folks on one-on-one or they come into meetings, which happens often, I'll say, oh, by the way, have you had a chance to read the Office of Management and Budget M1722? And they'll say, no, we haven't seen that. I said, well, you know, if I want to support Soraya, if I want to do what supports the executive branch, if you want to do what you need to do to support the other agencies, That's good information to know. We have 1725. There's Bill Zielinski in my office can rattle every number off really well. I can't quite do that. But 1725 is cybersecurity. We have the IT modernization plan. And one of the new contracts we have in place, the Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions, EIS, one of the folks that works with me will very quickly say, yes, we're on page 14, 15, and 16. So that is where our focus is, as it should be. We have some great guidance in all of that. It's a lot to read, but for those of you that haven't had a chance to read some of those recent documents that are coming out of the White House and out of OMB, I encourage you to do so.
Well, thank you so much. We're not going to take all these questions right down the line. This next one just going to happen to work its way. I'm going to go back to, Kay, something you brought up. You talked about vehicles and the like, and so if you don't mind, Soraya, I'd like to start with you, being so close to the mission. How do you figure out an acquisition strategy? How do you come up with a way to approach an acquisition and plan that, and actually what kind of guidance do you give, and how do you actually implement that?
So first of all, what I am continually emphasizing to everyone, it's all in the planning. I don't care what anybody tells you. If we don't sit down as a team, the program, the procurement, the finance, all the players, and figure out what it is that we're trying to do, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, what is the mission that we're trying to fulfill, when do you need this, how do you need this? The CIO's office teases me quite a bit because I typically tell them, let's start with the whiteboard.
Yeah.
Let's just write down. Don't come to me with the 20-pound statement of work. I don't care. Talk to me. Tell me what you need, when you need it, how you need it. How are you going to use it? What's the impact? Who's going to use it? Who are your customers of this service? And we start with that conversation. Based on that conversation, what I always tell folks is our role in government is to be as efficient and as practical as possible. We want to get through the process as quickly and as painlessly as possible. And I've been a program manager, so I can assure you I think that way. So the first thing that I always do is, do we already have a contract that does this? Is there a GSA vehicle? Do we at DHS have a vehicle? Is there another agency vehicle that we might be able to tap to do this kind of work that will meet our need? Notice I said that will meet our need. We're not going to force fit a requirement into a contract. If there isn't, then we start talking about whether we write our own vehicle. And then the question becomes, do we write a vehicle that's for use across the DHS spectrum, or do we write a vehicle that's very specific to this requirement? And a lot of that will be driven by what the requirement is. Finally, the other thing that I talk about is we don't need to reinvent the wheel. This is not rocket science. We've been doing this. I've been doing it for 37 years, and I suspect that up here in this panel, we have a high number of years of experience. So we know how to do this, and we know how to buy this. But sometimes we don't necessarily know how industry is selling it. So we need to get out there as quickly as possible and start talking to you, the industry. And based on the timing of the procurement, how much time, what I know about the industry, we're either going to go out with an RFI, we're going to go out with a draft RFP, or we're going to invite you in for discussions to talk to us. How should we structure this procurement? What are the nuances of it? What do we need to be thinking about? And I do think it's important that if we spend that time up front planning, and I'm not talking years, I'm talking sometimes just weeks, sometimes just days. If we spend that time up front talking, we're going to do a much better job on the procurement, and industry is going to be much better prepared to really respond and to help us understand how we structure that solicitation. So that's what goes into it. And of course it depends, on the urgency of the requirement. I mean, sometimes you don't have a lot of luxury to plan, but you know what? In reality, we are already foreseeing those things. We're already thinking about those things. I'll give you an example. On the hurricane, on I think it was the Friday before the hurricane hit, Bobby McCain, the HCA at FEMA, had already come to me with a list of congressional notification waivers for the contracts that he knew he was going to use. We already know what we're probably going to be using to support the mission need, because we've done this once or twice before. So there is even planning even for an emergency, believe it or not. We kind of know what we're doing out here.
Excellent. Laura, if you will, please. Thank you.
And actually, that's a perfect lead-in for, I'm going to talk a little bit about the acquisition gateway and how it supports, and hopefully, and the goal is to actually shorten the cycle that Soraya just talked about. So for those of you who might not be familiar, the Acquisition Gateway is an online platform that we've been developing at GSA for the past 3 years. But if you look at it, it doesn't have the GSA stamp of ownership on it. The intention is that it's actually somewhere where the acquisition workforce across the government can go to be able to shorten that planning cycle. Each of the category managers has space on the platform for their category. So on the IT side, there is IT category for security and protection. Jackie has information out there about what's happening in the security and the protection world that the acquisition workforce with those requirements needs to know. Mm-hmm. And then you get into the links of, okay, what contracts are already available. So the goal is to be able to shorten that planning cycle time, get the information you need, so you actually are getting to the points of the critical decisions. And where that happens then is that we also have draft statements of work. We have documents out there that we're asking the government-wide community and the supplier community to share with us. So while I'm talking about this in the sense of how does the acquisition workforce use the gateway, the reality is this is also a tool that's been accessed well over 50,000 times by industry as well. And I know that there's some companies out there who are using this as a way to figure out the responses for RFIs, that it also contains a wealth of information and data that helps you understand how the government's thinking. And because the category managers are using it, because there is all that data available, you actually it becomes easier to understand it, to penetrate what sometimes can be an impenetrable wall of communication. Mm-hmm. I know that DHS specializes in vendor communications and outreach, and that they're the leader in that. But we have a number of agencies that this also helps sort of understand where we're coming from, what those priorities are that Kay already listed out, because we're putting out there. We have memos on how we're supposed to be using mobility. We have memos on laptop, desktop purchasing. This is the place to sort of understand all of those things that drive the government to shape its requirements particular ways. So as we're talking about vehicles, I'm going to step in and say that that's where the strategies are, and that's where the overarching thinking is coming from.
If you will, please.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and I really, I want to build also on the point that Soraya was making about performance-based acquisition. We really need, as a acquisition community, to put some real thought into getting back to performance-based acquisition and all the things Soraya talked about. What does success look like? You know, start with the end in mind. And I remember talking about this when I was ONB in 2000. Exactly. So we have room for progress. And I think, you know, if we start thinking in terms of, you know, sort of the what it is you need, what it is you're trying to achieve, rather than the how. But I think specifically this week, such a great week to remember, of course, September 11th. And the tragedy of September 11th. But I don't know that a lot of people know. I was at ASI Government at the time, and we were very deep into performance-based acquisition, and the Pentagon reconstruction effort was a statement of objectives that I believe was about 2 or 3 pages. And the very important, critical, emotional work ended up being done way ahead of schedule and under budget. And it was a 3-page statement of work. So I share that with people all the time, especially when we're talking to someone and they have a statement of work that's 200, 250 pages. I'm like, okay, can we talk? So it strikes me that as a community, that's something we really want to think about. And then also, I learned a lot working with the Technology Transformation Service that Laura mentioned earlier that's with us, because they are so deep into the Agile space. And I think that's something that we are thinking about as a procurement community as well. But what was good for me, and yes, you can teach old dogs new tricks, because you know they asked some really relevant questions. Well, why do you do? I felt like it was like I was with my 5-year-old kids again. Why do you do this? Why'd you do that? What about this? What about that? And at the end of the day, we learned so much, and we totally improved our process. As a matter of fact, the output, the outcome of that was the plain English roadmap that I think a lot of folks in industry have really championed and found to be very, very useful. But at the beginning of that process was that very concept I was talking about, or why do you do this? Why do you do these things? And that's so much of what I think we need to think about as we go forward in our acquisition vehicles.
If I could
Please.
add a point there, I mean, that's exactly what we got to get to. We got to start talking about outcomes. We got to stop. Every time somebody comes to me and says, I need an IDIQ contract, I go, really? When did you become a contracting officer? Don't tell me the vehicle, tell me what you're trying to do. Tell me when you're trying to do it, what you're trying to achieve, and what your expectations are. That's what we really need to know. And I say this, and I know that day is coming. I think we overuse the IDIQ contracts to a great extent, and we're leaving money on the table, and we're leaving requirements on the table, because we're kind of force-fitting ourselves into these massive vehicles that are wide open, so that way we can try to specify it at a task order level, when we should really be writing a contract for what it is we need. We're not doing you a service, and believe it or not, we're not doing ourselves a service. So I am all about the outcome. What is the business proposition? What is the value that we're bringing to the table? I often chastise my team. They hear this all the time. I go, we're counting widgets again. Don't tell me how many contracts you awarded. Tell me how many successful contracts we have. How many contracts achieved, fulfilled the mission goals and objectives. That's what we need to get to.
And that's very insightful from all of you. I would imagine that just about any kind of contract you might divine, industry is going to respond to it in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I'm sure you've got plenty of times when you've put out a solicitation and there's only been maybe one offer that responded. But there probably have been many times where we put out a solicitation, there have been zero offers to respond. So, industry obviously is willing to adapt, right? But to that point, I want to get into this discussion, if you will, about strategic sourcing and category management. And Kay, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you, right? And then we'll come back this way across the table. And if I may, I want to stage this a little bit. There's one. I'd love to know, really from the eye and the mind of GSA. What is the definition of strategic sourcing, right? What does it really mean, and what does it look like when it's successful? And I'll follow up with a few other things, but the main question is, once the boat is built, does the door ever open again, and how do you manage that over the time that it exists? So, please.
Well, I think, if I could be king for the day, or I should say queen for the day, yes. I just met some folks from the United Kingdom. They reminded me that they have Her Majesty the Queen. So anyway, but I think I would call it strategic solution sourcing, because it goes back to everything we talked about. It really is all about the solution and how we get to the solution. But I think for me, and I don't even know exactly what we would use as the exact definition for strategic sourcing, except it's being a lot smarter about how we buy things across the enterprise. And the initiative and the effort that I got to be a part of that started probably about 3 years ago was the government-wide strategic solution for laptop desktops. And what was significant about that was the cross-agency collaboration that we all came together. It was probably at the time about 24 different agencies that all came together in the beginning to talk about standard terms and conditions, to talk about, the 80-20 spend, and again, all about how we serve the needs of our customers that are doing the day-to-day mission delivery. I remember having a conversation with one of the folks from the Army, and he was having a little bit of frustration around the conversation of what we were trying to achieve and what he thought he and his team needed to do the job. And he said, well, I tell you what, I have to have a laptop I can drop off of a 30-foot cliff. And I said, well, first of all, I'm glad I don't have your job. And secondly, that doesn't fit into the 80%. So it was fun. It was a very healthy discussion. But to me, that's the heart of strategic solution, is just strategic sourcing, is really being a lot smarter about what we buy and how we buy it. And ultimately, we go back to that performance-based, what are we trying to achieve? But I think that cross-agency collaboration and the ongoing discussion that we still have in the GSS group across it, we have a core group. Those of you that may not know, GSA has vehicles, NASA has vehicles, NIH, and of course Army with the Army Chess Program. And it's such a strong, continuous collaboration. To me, that's what's really important about strategic. I think the real word there is strategic. And can things change? Can things be added? Absolutely. In the GSS example, that we're constantly meeting with the industry providers to see what else is in the market. We're adding product, things like universal docking stations are in the mix. And to me, that's what it takes to be strategic.
May I ask a quick follow-up though? And it's thank you again, excellent. But how do you see that across the course of those? What would, being, if you were queen for the day, how would you best evaluate the performance of the offers, right? So some are successful in being evaluated to be there to perform, but at some point you may or may not have the right mix going forward. It might be performance related of the offer. It might be a technology shift where well-performing offer, but now the market has moved on somewhere else. No dig at any organization, but there are probably not a lot of need for strategic sourcing of mainframes right now, right? But when you go to cloud and other sort of things like that, there may be some, obviously some emerging things there. So, so if a vehicle is put in place, and we think, 10 years ago, the iPhone wasn't with us, and it's not a technology definer, but it's a significant, enough point to look at. Things were different then. So, so if you've got a vehicle that's been in place for a long time, do you kind of have the right mix? So, what are your thoughts about how best to establish performance around the offers and around the actual GWAC itself as to whether or not it's delivering most effectively to the mission?
Well, I will kind of start and then let my esteemed colleagues, of course, add to what I'm thinking. But it really goes back a lot to what Sarai was talking about earlier about having the conversation, having the discussion. And I think that's what's so important. This gives me a good chance to highlight the fact that Soraya was just mentioned in a really good article, I think it was Federal Times, but about breaking through the ice with the communication and the ice with industry. She has absolutely set her North Star on doing that, and it's been tremendous. We don't know what we don't know, and without that dialogue and without that constant communication, and procurement, believe it or not, is a lot more agile than people maybe think. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of room to do things differently, to do continuous improvement, to make changes where we need to make change.
Can I add to that? One of the things that a lot of us have been talking about, the three of us here, but even across government, senior procurement executives, is that on a lot of these government-wide or even strategically sourced vehicles within agencies, the on-ramp and the off-ramp, which is something that you're getting to, and making that decision about when we on-ramp and when we off-ramp on the market's behavior. Who's coming into the market, who's leaving the market, how are they performing? Is the company bidding? I mean, one of the things that I've raised to my team, Jackie's wagging her head, yes, vehemently, because I raised this on the strategically sourced vehicle. You're not going to get a contract just so you could wave it around and say, I got a DHS contract. You're going to get a contract because you're going to do some work. So you better be bidding and you better be winning, or else you're not going to have that contract much longer. And you better be performing well. And we have a duty to inform you on how you're doing. We have a duty to bring you in, and I have this conversation with program managers all the time. You're not happy with the contractor? Before you boot them out, how about you bring them in and tell them? Tell them what they might not be doing, what they're not understanding, what your expectations are. So we have a duty to carry that dialogue, not just from the planning phase, but across the procurement spectrum, and make sure that industry understands. But I am a person that when somebody comes to me and says a contractor's not performing, I say, okay, let's bring their leadership in, and let's have the conversation. And if they can't fix it, they're out of here. That's why we have termination clauses. But we have a lot of flexibilities and we have a lot of ability to change those contracts, to manage those contracts in a way that continues to fulfill the need. And I think the on-ramp and the off-ramp is something that we're getting much better at, I would say, across the government, and we're starting to exercise more flexibilities in that area.
And I want to build on, I want to expand actually on Kay's answer because I'm sure she will kick me if I overstep my bounds. But but the one thing is that she was talking about the collaboration across the agencies and the criticality of that. And I think what she underplayed is actually the difficulty of those conversations and the length of time and the commitment that it takes. And once again, Jackie's nodding because she's at the forefront of these, of those conversations to come to some level of consensus to be able to strategically source. And to be able to strategically source with real requirements and real commitments behind them is a very challenging experience. And I have the pleasure of saying that because I also have the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative Program Management Office as part of my office. So we've seen the iterations of how that works well and how it works not so well. But what I also want to touch on is while we're talking about the agency cross-collaboration, the other key piece of that is understanding exactly what the industry cycle is and for those particular commodities or services. And that's what can't be downplayed because the way that the government crafts our requirements is going to can potentially drive significant costs throughout the supply chain. And by understanding that, we can better meet your cycles and work together. And that was something that the laptop and desktop project did do, is that they sat down with some of the key laptop suppliers, asked either you look at you're a large consumer supplier but you're not playing in the market space, why aren't you working with the government, what can we do to get you there, or you know, what can we do because we're buying umpteen models of your laptop, what can we do better to consolidate our requirements so that we can actually work with your manufacturing cycle and drive down prices. So those are some of the conversations that also need to occur as part of the strategic sourcing initiative, and that's being started through some of the category managers are beginning to take that on as they're beginning to understand the government marketplace in each of their categories better. Then they're then able to expand that conversation out into industry.
If I could add to that, the conversation about strategic sourcing is hard across government. It's hard even within an agency. In other words, even when we're focusing on something very mission specific that we wouldn't go to, like, say, GSA to try to buy because it's really unique to our world, but there's 2 or more components that need it, having that discussion, even internal to your own organization, is hard. Oh, and by the way, for those of you that are large, really large businesses, I bet you it's hard for you too out there. Because anytime you're in a bureaucratic environment, it is hard. People kind of tend to be very possessive about their needs. And so knowing how to have that conversation and knowing how to get people to come to the table and really talk about what drives them, what is their motivator, what is it that they're trying to achieve, and showing them how we can help them achieve that in a much more efficient manner is a tough thing to do, but it's well worth it.
Sorry, I just got to add one more thing real quick. Just to follow on what Soraya was saying, and Laura said it so well as well. 2 things I want to share, as I talked about earlier. Think again about the GSS. That's, I'm sure, many of you may be familiar. It's on the gateway, as a matter of fact, but it's government-wide strategic solution for laptop, desktop. Nowhere in there, and we were very purposeful as a group, that cross-agency collaboration, to not use the word sourcing. So I think that's important. I think the other thing that I learned that was so powerful for me, and this was 3 years ago, is that partnership that Soraya was talking about. I had my meeting at OMB talking about this initiative, and this was the workspace that we were going to at least initially focus on, and it was really exciting. I felt very jazzed. I thought, man, we can really do this. This will be great. And someone who's also had a 30-plus year career. It was pretty exciting. I went back to GSA and I had a meeting with one of the providers who will remain nameless. Flew in from Texas, but that's neither here nor there. But a very large provider of hardware, and we started talking. I said, oh, by the way, I was just at OMB. I'm sorry I'm a couple minutes late, but I met with several other agencies, and we're starting to compare prices. We're starting to compare terms and conditions, and we're going to actually look at this from an enterprise-wide strategic view. And the room got deathly quiet. And then after about 10 minutes, somebody said, "Are you kidding me? You're going to compare pricing?" So anyway, we have a lot of room to continue to grow from there, but it was a real eye-opener for me that on both sides, we have a real opportunity to help the government perform the very best it can.
Great. I would offer that as the criticality of category management really comes to fruition, and as this effort to strategically acquire these services that are needed, that for those that are less able to understand those things, more of these cutting-edge organizations. We had a Silicon Valley panel earlier. I just don't know that organizations like that will likely walk that path very often, right? But still, some of those capabilities might actually fit into those areas. Would be great to maybe get that message about the acquisition gateway out there more, so that folks are more aware of what those tools and capabilities are there. And if you have not taken a look at it, it's actually extremely impressive. I want to shift to workforce now. In my time at the department, whenever we saw a program running well, and I'll share a little secret here, in spite of all the great processes and centers of excellence and things like that we built, a well-running program could often be traced back to a fantastic program manager. And, I mean, it kind of seems to go without saying, but not everybody has the same expertise in terms of career coming out of the gate, and oftentimes it was necessary to help those that are less skilled to come up to those new levels of skill because of the complexity and the integration that was happening across the department. So certainly in the acquisition workforce, and so with some of these emerging trends, you probably have a bit of a divide between the very skilled. At one point, hopefully some of your staff, like Jackie, will be sitting up in chairs like this being talked about their career and their expertise. But you've also got a young workforce too. So can you speak a little bit about how the acquisition workforce is being brought along with some of this the strategic thinking and how it might be implemented? So Soraya, would you like to begin?
Sure. So I think most of you have heard me talk a little bit about our Acquisition Professionals Career Program. So that's our entry-level program for acquisition professionals, whether they're in program management, cost estimating, procurement, logistics, et cetera. We continue to add categories of labor, and it's a 3-year program where we bring folks in. They come in as a cohort, so they come in as a team. They go through their training together, and then they're assigned periodically to components, and they're working in the components, learning from hopefully the masters, the subject matter experts that are out there, the good ones, hopefully. But when they graduate, then we hire them into the organization. For the first 3 years, they work for me, and then they get hired into the particular components. So that's one way that we're bringing folks in. We're also making sure that when we go out and we're seeking people, whether senior or junior people, that we're also looking at them outside of those programs, because not everybody can come in through an intern program. So when we go out and try to hire, we're trying to be diverse in our thinking of experience. No longer limiting ourselves to say, I got to have a person that has X number of years of government experience. We're looking for people with industry experience, academic experience, et cetera. The other thing that we're doing is making sure that we create opportunities. A lot of times we have people out here who just haven't had the opportunity to work on certain things. Talk a little bit about the procurement side, and some of us older procurement folks talk a lot about the new workforce doesn't always have the opportunity to work on major competitive acquisitions. Why? because we do a lot of strategically sourced contracts, and we do a lot of IDIQ contracts. So what they tend to be indoctrinated in is competitive orders, task orders, writing orders, and the like. So what we've got to do is create opportunities for people to participate on some of these large procurements, to work across the agencies when we see opportunities and share resources and give detail opportunities. I've had people from my staff go on detail to GSA to work on projects. GSA folks have come over to our organization to work on detailed projects. So we, the leadership of the organizations, have to think this through. We have to develop our people. We have to give them the opportunities to learn. And when they're not doing well, we got to tell them what they're not doing well. And when they're doing well, we need to tell them what they're doing well. And we can't be selfish. I have worked with a lot of managers who say, I'm not sending them on detail because I got, this ream of paper to work on. And I always give them the answer. So don't send them on the detail. And when you lose them permanently, what are you going to do? How about we send them on those details? How about we start talking a little bit more about collaborating and learning from one another? The other thing that I am focused on over the next year, and I've been talking in our leadership, is about collaborating with industry a little bit more. Because I think having that industry experience in government and bringing industry into government so you understand from where we sit makes us stronger. We're going to get much better program managers, contract specialists, and I think that's what the workforce of the future is going to look like. It's going to be a lot more blended in that way.
Laura, I know you've got a lot of energy around this, so would you share some of your thoughts?
So what I would touch on is the importance of program management. And that is, and I've not been a contracting officer, but what I have done is spent my career in program management from the standpoint and understanding how do you build requirements, how do you build to a successful outcome, how do you do the necessary planning. And so one of the things that as I'm looking at my own workforce, and when people come, and whenever anybody walks up to me and asks career advice, I have a couple of things. One is really go get your FAC PPM, or if you're in industry, get a PMP. And understand, even if you don't necessarily run projects, you need to understand the terminology, because that's how we write requirements, that's how we write outcomes, that's how we think. And a lot of the younger workforce, especially on my team, tells me that they work in Agile. And that anything that's sort of PMP or FAC PPM certified is very waterfall oriented. And my response to that is, look at, most of the world still thinks in a waterfall development cycle. And if you can't translate that into what you're actually talking about, then you're not going to be able to communicate either to your peers across the government, and you're not going to be able to communicate with industry. And you won't understand why you're not communicating, because you won't even know the vernacular. And so being able to sort of take that step back and say, yes, maybe things have changed and maybe we're evolving, but being able to keep the balance in both worlds is key to sort of being able to develop a well-rounded workforce. The other piece is, and this goes back to what we were talking about with strategic sourcing, is the collaboration. And being able to understand how to drive and facilitate to outcomes. And so, and being able to actually set up people with facilitator training, because it's not about being able to run a large meeting, it's being able to run a large meeting to get to the accomplishment that you want at the end of that period of time. And so when I'm thinking about, it's a blend of those technical and those cross-cutting skills to be able to really get a workforce that can think critically and can actually translate what they're trying to accomplish into outcomes, and be able to communicate that out both to their customers and to the supplier world.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all the comments that have been made. I think a little bit of an addition, and to build on what we've been talking about, is we as leaders have to walk the talk. And if we're going to encourage our folks to be innovative and to be thinking outside of the box and to be willing to talk to the incubators, we have to show the way. We have to lead the way. I had the opportunity to work at OPM about 6 years ago, and I had a chance to go out to the Presidio and talk to some folks at the Presidio, and I'll never forget, I was standing outside of the Presidio looking over at the Pacific Ocean and the Golden Gate Bridge, and I said, wow, I could be pretty inventive here, and I could think some really, really cool different thoughts. But what occurred to me was the fact that we don't have that as much in our day-to-day world, and it's hard to think outside of the box and be inspired. It's very easy to be inspired looking at a view like that. So we tried to bring a little bit of that back. At one time, we thought about trying to do a Federal Executive Institute on the West Coast, and that wasn't realistic. It didn't work. But what we do have is the OPM Innovation Lab, and that was sort of the beginning of that. And I've had several of my folks have an opportunity to go over to the OPM Innovation Lab and try out some ideas and do some customer-centric designs. But Laura and Soraya both, because I know them so well, are very much in that walk the talk, lead the way. I don't know that we have that across the board, so I think that's one of the things that's going to be really important. And I have a lot of aha moments. Like I said, it's easy for me to still learn new things. I was on a panel at an NCMA event, National Contract Management Association event, and I was talking my standard recruitment and retention. Got to do recruitment and retention. And finally, this young millennial stood up and she said, "I don't want to be retained. I want to be trained. I want to be mentored. I want to be given feedback. I do not want to be retained. I want you to let me go after a couple of years." So that was another aha moment for me.
You know, you raise a really good point. One of the things that when I'm providing leadership mentoring or talking to folks who are aspiring to be leaders, that's the first thing that I tell them. The job of a leader is really to inspire and motivate the workforce. That's really what a leader is there for. If you have the right people on your team, they're going to get the job done. The job of a leader is to really inspire, motivate, and sometimes to stand up and support them. That's what leaders do. And I believe that we should be creating opportunities for people. I am a person that, you know, today is the last day for my chief of staff, somebody who I admire greatly. She's going to go work at another agency. When she called me and told me that she had accepted the job at the other agency, it's something that's in her career field. Instead of being upset, I was excited for her. I was happy for her. I encouraged her. I also told her, if those people don't treat you well, come on home. But that's, you know, but that's also what a leader does. But we should be encouraging people to get new experiences, to get diverse experience. That's what's going to make us better. I moved around in my career, so I'm never going to be a hypocrite. When people come and talk to me about going someplace else, I try to give them the best advice, which is make sure you're learning something new, make sure it's the right opportunity for you, and make sure you've even considered how it will impact you personally. But other than that, if that's the right answer for you, it's okay. For some of my folks out here, don't get any ideas, okay? By the way, I want to correct something, because there's some folks out here that keep going, who is this Jackie person, right? Because we point at Jackie and she's wagging her head. Jackie Smythe runs my strategic sourcing program office. She is the category manager for all things security for the government, and she is just phenomenal. So
She
Jackie,
is.
that's who
Let me
Jackie
give her-
Smythe is.
yeah.
I just want to make sure you knew who it was, because, you know, we keep saying Jackie, and we're all going, this is fictional Jackie out there, right?
She does exist. Look, I'd be remiss if we don't get into some very, very DHS-focused topics. So I need to get into some of those, but real quickly, because I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. I do want to go through us just a quick little lightning round. Okay, Queen for a day. Okay, so you know what's emerging. What do you want from your role? Obviously, within the context of whatever the administration says the box is, right? But what do you want from your role? What would really allow you to move your practice forward? What do you really foresee coming forward? Just very briefly, your thoughts, Kay.
Well, I think, very briefly is the hard part. I have so many, there's so many great opportunities, but there is so much available in the world of technology, and the speed of technology moves so fast. I know my colleague, Jose Arrieta, who I stole from another department, and Soraya knows him well, but he was here earlier talking about distributed ledger technology, blockchain. And sometimes Jose, I say it's like holding a moonbeam in your hand, because he's just, you know, he has all these great inspiring ideas. But I think the point of that is, so what I want to do is I want to allow those moonbeams to shine and to come up with new ways of doing things. The distributed ledger technology, if it takes off, is going to be tremendous. tremendous. It's going to help all of our customers. It sort of eliminates some of it automates and artificial intelligence and all those things that sometimes just are mind-boggling to me are just incredibly great opportunities. So that's really my North Star is I want to look back a couple of years from now and say, wow, that's some really cool stuff we were able to do.
Great, thank you.
So, you know, Cedric, when you raised that question, the immediate thing that came to my mind was time. And like, what do you want to be doing? And that really is because, and that gets back to collaboration takes time, understanding requirements, understanding what people need, building consensus, or at least enough of a consensus that you can move forward. All of that takes time. So that's where a lot of my effort is spent. But the other piece is data. And this is, if I look at what I've seen the change in the last several years, it's been the bringing together of the government's data, understanding better how to use the data that we already had in the federal procurement data system, and really building out a lot of the dashboards, a lot of the visualizations to give the federal agencies, if they didn't already have it, really visibility into how they're spending, where they're spending, who the top supplier communities are across the government, and then giving them that information to be able to understand how do they want to manage inside of their own agencies. And that's a lot of what the category management effort's been really focused on. We talked, and that's not only just the obligation data, but that's also beginning to get into the pricing data that we're collecting through the best-in-class contracts and and performance data. But if I look at the way that the world has shifted and what I expect, where I expect beyond collaboration for my time to be focused, it's going to be better use and outreach of that data and sharing that across the federal community.
Ditto and ditto. Both of you have raised fantastic points. I'll go to the other, because I agree with everything that they've said. I'll go to something even a little bit more fundamental that I would like to see, and maybe it's because my time is shorter. I'm a little bit older than them. No, just kidding. Well, I'm a lot older than you. No, just kidding. But I want to get to a point where we start seeing a little bit more trust within the government. All too often, when we are out here having conversations, we talk about the IG and the GAO as out there, and they're overseeing us, or the Hill is overseeing us. We got to get to a point where we're collaborating, not just across the agencies, but even with our overseers. Because they do have a job to do, and their job is valid. They're there to stop us from doing crazy, stupid things. That's just the reality of it. But we have to find a way to work better together so that we're communicating more effectively, so it's not seen as a hindrance. It's not seen as risk aversion. It's not seen as the scary thing. I am not scared of it. I recognize that sometimes they might slap my hands. I might do some things that I might deserve to have my hand slapped. But maybe if I go talk to them a little bit more frequently, if I help them understand what I'm trying to do and why I'm trying to do it, if I invite them in to at least tell me where my pitfalls are, maybe we can just start working a little bit better together with those oversight organizations. We might get to the point where we really achieve some efficiencies. And the same holds true with industry. I think we have a lot of really good rules, and they're in place for valid reasons. But sometimes those rules are getting in our way, and they're hindering our ability to really communicate with one another. So I fundamentally want to see us get to those better relationships that enable all the things that we're talking about. Because at the end of the day, that's what this job is all about. It's about relationships, and it is all about ultimately meeting the mission.
Great, thank you so much. I'd like to just before we actually move into Q&A, I'd like to actually maybe tee out a couple DHS-related queries.
Oh.
All right. And you know, and I'm going to use a term that you can feel free to disagree with, but as we're kind of in the nearing the twilight of Eagle 2, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on Eagle 3 or something else.
So, you know what? I love Cedric. We worked together for many, many years. I do. I adore him. And here's what how I'm gonna answer that question. You need to stick around for the next panel, and at the end of that panel, I'll answer that question.
Promise? Excellent.
Well, because we got a CIO panel coming up, and I
All
got to
right,
take
good.
care of my cousins
Okay,
out
good,
there, right?
good. Okay.
So, right. So you
right.
stick around if you really want to know about Eagle 3, and we'll talk at the end of the next panel. How's that?
Wow, how about that for a little leader? Oh my
Talk
goodness.
about, hey, did I just there were a few people over here not happy, I can tell. They didn't even clap. They're like,
They're like, wait
I
a
was
second,
leaving. I was going to beat rush hour. No, just kidding.
Well,
Next question?
well, I'll go ahead and try it. So here's my second swing at that. How about a follow-on to Flash, whatever that might look
That's
like?
tied to Eagle as well. That's
Whatever that might
my
be.
CIO
Okay.
buddies. After they talk, I'll share with you what they're
Guys,
thinking.
I tried. Anyway. Okay. Well,
CIOs owe me a lot of money, don't
yes, they do.
Nice.
And look, I know that she will genuinely do so. So thank you very much, Soraya, for that. I'd really like to make sure that we open the floor for some Q&A. You know, you have at the table here, self not included, these wonderful executives that, although they would certainly always make themselves available for communication, this is a great opportunity to have a really good dialogue. So please, I encourage you, go to the mics. And I promise
We
you're
answered all the
you're not gonna reveal any of your industry secrets and all the sort of things. Just so you know, I'd encourage you to have the dialogue.
Any questions? None? Everybody want to know about Eagle 3 and Flash,
Yes, sir.
huh?
Mr. Olive.
Cedric. So Soraya, for years, DHS has been saying they're going to fix the acquisition planning forecast system. When on the timeline will that be addressed?
So I'm going to answer that, and you might not even like my answer.
The CIO panel?
No, I was going to answer that the way, give you a little history. So the acquisition planning forecasting system is probably the best one that is in the government. Other agencies have come to copy us. Because the reality is that the forecasting system is typically a static document that agencies produce, publish, and then see you later in a year you'll get it. So when folks ask me about the acquisition planning forecasting system, that's the first data point that I want to make sure that you get. That at DHS, we took our job seriously and we created this system and we try to update it periodically. And it is not intended to do the job of data aggregators. The reality is what we built that system for was to identify what the potential requirements are out there. And over the years, we have implemented many changes to it to make it better. And we continue to do that. But we actually fund that ourselves. We scrape together budget for that because the reality is of the 1,500 other things that you, the industry, want me to do, that's not the one that's really driving you. There are data aggregators that do that, and I'm not trying to compete with them. So my answer to you is that I think the acquisition planning forecasting system, certainly we can do a lot of other things to it, and over time we continue to fix it, but we're doing a little bit at a time because it's not one of my top priorities in reality. Did you want to answer?
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, that's almost like the last place you should be looking. Back to the point I made earlier, think about who your customers are. For those of you in industry, it still amazes me. Let me put it this way: when I was in private sector, and people, some of my team would come and say, "Oh, we want to go sell this to this agency." Well, what's in their strategic plan? I don't know. I've never read it. So I think there's where the golden nuggets are. And I mention all those things that are driving the executive branch, you know, and my customers like Soraya and the other agencies and FEMA and what they're doing right now. Those are the drivers, and that's where you should start and really look and see where you have input or where you have a play. So Laura's going to add.
Yeah, let me just add one other thing. One of the tools that we have rolled out on the Gateway is a small business forecasting. And this is something that for the same reason that Soraya just said, it's been a series of spreadsheets that have been difficult. So what we've done is we've made a portal available so that contracting officers can immediately enter their requirements, and we keep sort of a live list up and running that's easily searchable. So you can find that on the gateway. It contains data for GSA, and we're just getting ready to pilot a couple of bureaus out of a Department of Interior. So we're trying to help, we're trying to support the agencies that are interested in actually making that available to them for use as well. Yeah. So that's one place where you can begin to see some consolidated data.
Excellent.
Anne-Marie Johnson with Unisys. Thank you all for a very inspiring and uplifting panel conversation. I'd like to ask Soraya to tug on a little thread that I think I heard there, because I love what you're saying about getting better communication between industry and government, and that we understand each other's worlds much more fully. And I wanted to know if you could explain a little bit more about this idea of what your kind of next vision is beyond Reverse Industry Day, and how to get an even deeper understanding of what it's like to be on the industry side and respond to those solicitations coming.
Sure. So a couple of things. One, I want to take the Reverse Industry Days to the next level. We've talked a lot about our business processes. Now we really need to talk about the technologies and how we implement them and how we use them, because a lot of the stuff that we're doing, you're doing it too. So we need to learn from one another. You have good experiences and bad experiences, and we need to learn from both, right? In fact, I keep telling people, if you only learn from good experiences, you're probably not going to have a good experience, right? But where I'm trying to go is the reciprocal, I guess, training back and forth, where we actually can detail people in and out of our respective areas. We can do this well across government. We probably do it in a relatively good fashion with academia, depends on the agency. We need to be doing this with industry, and we got to get past all the rules, right? Because everybody freaks out, especially when I talk about procurement. It's easy to do in some of the technical fields, but when I talk about procurement, immediately certain folks' hairs stand on the back of their necks and they go, oh, conflict of interest. There's ways around that, and we got to figure out how we can do that, because that's what's really going to bring us closer together. That's what's going to help us really work together. And I got to tell you, you know, if you were here this morning, you heard Chip say it. If you haven't had the opportunity to work in the federal government, you should take that opportunity. Just as I would say, if you haven't had the opportunity to work in industry, you should. Working for the federal government, I came in for a job and I've stayed. And I think a lot about, you know, because retirement's getting close, I'm getting a little more gray hair. I think a lot about when that last day is, and I got to tell you, it's going to be a heartbreaker. I love what I do, and I am thrilled to be a part of this government. And I think service is noble, and so that's where I'm trying to go, where we really start exchanging people back and forth.
Yeah, and if I could build on that, Soraya, that is so key and so important. Thank you for the question. So being queen for the day, and it shouldn't
She's
take,
really stuck with this queen. I'm going to go get her a crown.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
And it shouldn't be that hard, but one of the most beneficial things that I've seen over my career is the government industry exchange program, where a federal employee goes out to industry, industry has a person come into government. When I was in private sector, I had 3 people that had participated in that program. I think DOD may still have portions of that. It was sunsetted for the civilian government. So I don't know, maybe we'll take that on again. But I learned so much in those 5 years. Now, I'm like Soraya, as I think about retirement, I'm like, oh, I wish I had those 5 years back. But I learned so much in that 5-year period of growing a startup company. I wished everybody in the government could experience what I experienced without doing it the hard way. It was a little scary when I walked out and left OMB. That's where I was at the time. It was a little scary for me, and yet it was one of the most enriching experiences ever. So I think we need to, let's figure that out. I think we can do it, Soraya.
I agree.
Yeah. And I do believe actually DHS has a program, and in fact, I actually think that they've kind of had their first exchange to occur.
We're doing it,
Yeah,
but in my opinion, we're
yeah.
just, we, the collective we,
Yeah.
not just DHS, government across the board, we're slow at this.
Yeah.
And I don't think it
Yeah.
has to be this hard, and I think
Yeah,
unfortunately
exactly.
that we let rules get in our way, and
Yep.
we let, you know,
Attorneys.
I did want to say that, but
Yeah.
thank you for
Well,
saying that.
that's so true, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, life in industry is very different than life in government, and life in government is very different than life in industry, and it's a little Venus and Mars issue, right? You know, because I think the communication efforts are very similar, but how they're interpreted on the other side of that curtain is very different, and would love to continue to see that improve. And somewhat to that end, if it's just, a little bit, I'll put a question here, somewhat related to that communication, right? You know, how market research is executed, and how that's continuing to improve over time. There's so many things. Chip lined out a number of the initiatives that Homeland Security has had. I thought it'd be really beneficial, Soraya, if you'll touch on those, but also Laura and Kay, if you could, regarding GSA, especially with relate to some very, very important GWACs that are in place, being considered to be put in place, and those that are being considered going in the future. So, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so what I keep telling folks is don't do market research for the sake of market research. Do market research because you're really trying to get something out of industry, because we're really trying to understand either how you sell the particular product or service, or the thoughts and ideas you have around how we can buy it more efficiently, how we can structure that solicitation more efficiently. And one of the things that I've really been pushing my folks, and in fact recently one of my HCAs experienced this, one of the heads of contracting experienced this, those one-on-one discussions with industry, because you guys are wonderful and you give us great ideas, but we get the best out of you when we have one-on-ones. I got it. I broke the code. You're not going to tell me everything in a public forum. But recently, I had one of our heads of contracting pick up the phone and invite companies in, and we had some really good dialogue and learned a lot about our requirement and about what we needed to tell industry about our requirement to really get good offers. And that's what I want market research to be about. It needs to be about the right level of conversation, the right level of, if you will, market research. In fact, I think the term market research is overused. But it's that right level of dialogue in that planning phase so that we can better understand how we inspire and motivate you through that solicitation, through that communication, to give us the best possible offer that really brings innovation, best practices, and all those things to the table. We have to get there, and I think we can.
And Laura Kay, if you will reflect, and I do want to make sure we get this last question also too, please.
Okay, I'll be really quick. Goes back to my performance-based discussion I had earlier. And I'm with Soraya on the market research piece, but that due diligence, and what is really hard in that communication is that we, the government, still have a hard time sort of articulating what it is we're trying to achieve, what our objectives are. So that process of due diligence and having that conversation about what it is that the government's trying to achieve, what the constraints are, that's key.
And one last thought, which is I'm working on a project right now, which, to be honest, is an entirely new area for us, and we're even trying to use market research to just understand how do we even start the scope, and so when we ultimately get to so that we can even begin to build the work streams for the project, and that's where I'm very dependent on what's going to come back through this market research and through these requests for information, so that we can even begin to. We know what we don't know, and we can begin to build that out. And that's actually a very difficult question to ask when you don't when you don't know the space, and it's entering a new area that even the industry hasn't necessarily gone in it in this direction, because the government just has different requirements. I won't even say special, but they don't necessarily match 100% to a commercial.
Great. Sir, go ahead, please.
Hi, Trevor from the Procurement Innovation Lab. Kay, this question is specifically for you, but everybody can feel free to chime in. The 2018 NDAA, specifically Section 801, set up GSA's implementation of the Amazon email structure, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where GSA sees that going.
Right. So thank you. I was wondering when that was going to come up today. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, this is the Thornberry legislation looking at a commercial platform. It is, at this point, we're excited about it. We don't have a lot of detail as of yet, since it's just in the legislation phase and the NDAA hasn't been passed. So, but that's one area where talking about market research and understanding that space better, and how the government might work in that area is a key place where we will be reaching out to industry to understand commercial best practices and how we adopt those.
Thank you so much. And folks, we are at the end of our time. I want to thank a number of folks that are here that I can't even get to. There are many men and women who have served in uniform that continue to serve through efforts like this, and my great appreciation for them. We have colleagues that have left the government recently, like Luke McCormick there, that continue to serve as he can, working with us and our colleagues. And of course, obviously, the service that's right here at this table. Always appreciative of you and everything that you do. And thank you for continuing to do the fine work that supports us to defend and protect our nation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, again, I want to thank Cedric and the ladies of this panel. This, the knowledge, the experience, and the insights that were given were a rare opportunity for many of us here that haven't heard this before. I've sat on a lot of panels, but I got to be honest with you. This, I think, it was one of the most educational, thought-provoking, and insightful panels that I've seen. So thank you all very much. And I started to write down to try to talk about some of the topics that were covered, but I ran out of 3x5 cards, so seriously. But I mean, we started talking about unified solutions. We hit the importance of early engagement. The acquisition gateway as a vehicle to shorten the procurement cycle. Talked about strategic sourcing as a method of being smarter about what was bought and how. Diversity in developing the workforce, which is a key issue for everybody, not just for government. It's a key issue for industry and academia as well. And I think one of the things, that a recurring theme in the events that we host is you need to be able to have trust. And then another key issue here was time and data. The world is moving at a very fast pace, and we've got to figure out how to keep up with it. On behalf of the panel, we're going to make a contribution to the FC Education Foundation Hurricane Relief, Disaster Relief Fund in your name. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for what was really an insightful and a great panel. I can't thank you enough. This was really great. Thank you again. Thank you. I got it. And before we go too far, Soraya, would you please come up here, please? Soraya wasn't.
Call me up to the principal's office. Chip was here this morning calling me out already. No?
Soraya wasn't here last night, but we gave out our Vigilant Awards, the FC Vigilant Award. These awards, the nominees for these awards are brought in by industry, and it's because it's for the role, and in many cases, the unsung heroes or the people that don't get the recognition and the due respect for the great work they do on a day-to-day basis in the Department of Homeland Security. Soraya wasn't available last night, so I'm going to take the opportunity now. I want you to know that she was being recognized by industry, and when you're recognized by your industry partners, I think that's something special. So on behalf of AFCEA and our partners, this is the AFCEA Vigilance Award for NUT 2017. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll save this one. Put that.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.